Well, I'm grateful for this chance to share a few thoughts with you. I don't know how many of you know who I am or what my connection with Heritage is. I just adjunct a course here every now and then. My connection is from a long, long time ago. I taught here in the early 90s when it was International Bible College. I primarily teach at Amridge down in Montgomery, and right now we are going through accreditation with ATS, the Association of Theological Schools. One of the things we've had to do recently in some of the committee work that we are doing is we were given this book, Earthen Vessels, which is written by Daniel O. Aylshire. I hope I'm pronouncing his name somewhere close to correctly, who at the time that he wrote this was the executive director of the Association of Theological Schools. ATS is the elite accreditation for theological schools. And we're hoping that in the next year and a half that we will go through the final stage of our accreditation with ATS. Those of us who were serving on the various committees were assigned to read this book, and in the process of reading this book referenced this book, David Kelsey, Between Athens and Berlin, which referred to two approaches to education, especially theological education. That is the Athens model and the Berlin model. And it was really an eye-opener to me. Sometimes I'm kind of slow catching on to things, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the purpose of a seminary. Now, the word seminary is not a common word that we've used in the Churches of Christ, but that's what Heritage Christian actually is. We're a seminary. We're a theological school. A seminary is a school that trains people for ministry or communicators of the gospel, as we often refer to it here at Heritage Christian. So, what is the purpose of a seminary? What is the purpose of seminary education? Okay, early on in this book, Aylshire says that the purpose of a seminary is this: its central education agenda is a deep and crucial form of learning. It's different than other types of education. It is soul-shaping learning that forms religious vocation. And so Heritage Christian has to approach education a little bit differently than UNA and a lot of other universities around Alabama and Tennessee and Mississippi. And we have to do assessment a little bit different. We have to approach upcoming application to SACS a little bit different, because we're going about what we're doing here in training everyone to approach our various vocations differently, because we're doing something very special here. How do people assess a minister in a minister's vocation? Okay, Aylshire says people assess a minister in three ways. What do you think they are? Just think for a moment, and I'll tell you what his three ways are. Number one, does he or she truly love God? Number two, do ministers relate with care and integrity to human beings? And number three, do they have knowledge and skill that the job requires? And they evaluate a minister in that order. Now think about it. If somebody can preach as an orator. I mean, they can hold an audience spellbound, but that individual has the ethics of Hugh Hefner, and that person doesn't show any love for people, doesn't show any love for God. They don't have any spirit. They have the spirituality of a doorknob. That person is going to be a failure as a minister. I mean, they're going to evaluate them in that order. They're going to be successful at number 3, but they're going to flunk number 2 and number 1. And so, what are we going to be about here at Heritage Christian in trying to train people to be ministers? Somebody may be a little bit short on certain skills. Somebody may not be an expert as a counselor. They may not be the best preacher. They may not be the best at Sunday school administration. But if somebody is very good at working with people, somebody really loves people, may be really good at going out and winning souls to Christ, and somebody may be very, very spiritual and love God, that person's going to get by in ministry. And so, what is so unique about training people for ministry? Okay, what Aylshire says, it doesn't begin primarily in learning a certain set of skills or a certain set of, or a certain amount of facts in a certain bit of information. Training in ministry primarily begins with learning how to be a Christian. And that's what makes it so unique. Now, what does all this have to do with accreditation? You've probably heard a lot about accreditation, especially if you've been around Michael Jackson for the last few years, because he's the point man in trying to get SACS accreditation for HCU. Okay, if the purpose of a school is simply to pass along information, then how do you assess whether or not a school is doing its job? Well, you give some tests. Does the student know that 1 + 1 = 2? Okay? If the purpose of a school is not only to pass along information, if the purpose of a school is not only to train people in certain skills like preaching and counseling and administration, but if the purpose of a school is to shape the person spiritually and ethically and morally, that's difficult, isn't it, Michael? How can you assess whether or not a school is doing its job? I mean, how can you give a test as to whether or not at the end of a class that a student is taking, that student is a more spiritual person, a more moral person, a more Christian person? Now, you may know that that person knows this counseling theory, right, Rosemary? But it's hard to know whether that person is a more Christian person. Okay, ATS standards refer to the deepening spiritual awareness of students. That's what ATS schools are supposed to be about. And they refer to the fact that students need to grow in moral sensibility and character. Now, what this means is not that students need to know more about prayer, but rather that students need to be students that are praying more. It doesn't mean that students need to learn more about ethics, but rather that students need to be more ethical people. In the area of theology, it doesn't mean that students need to know simply more about theology, but Dr. Daly, it means that in the area of theology, students need to, in the Hebrew sense, they need to know God. And if you all don't know the subtlety of what I'm talking about, then talk to Nathan after class or after chapel, and he'll explain to you what I mean. This book, Between Athens and Berlin, two different models of education. One model of education that goes back several thousand years, the Athens model of education. That's the professional model of education. That's the ministry model of education. And then, just a few hundred years ago, they came along with the Berlin model of education. That's the academic model of education. Okay, Aylshire says we need both of those. We need to communicate information. We need to learn facts. We need to learn knowledge. But we also need the Athens model, the professional model. We need to shape the person. We need to learn skills. And that's what we learn in the ministry field. And he says that the line, the boundary between these two models is paper thin. And in your classes, you're going to be dealing with both of these. In your Bible classes, you shouldn't simply be learning information. You should also be shaping the person. In your ministry classes, you shouldn't simply be learning skills. You shouldn't simply be shaping the person. You should also be learning information. And so both of these should be happening at the same time in both departments and in both programs of the school. I want to read you one quotation here because I think it is very, very important. And notice both sides, both models here of what should be going on here at Heritage Christian University. Okay, learning for religious vocation engages head and heart, knowledge and skill, community faith and personal commitment, intellectual and practical wisdom, academic, that's your MA degree, and devotional understanding, that's your MDiv degree. What's this have to do with Heritage Christian University, which is a seminary? Okay, I'm just an adjunct here. I don't have any major self-interest. There's no self-serving in what I have to share with you today. I think HCU's program, your administration, your faculty, your full-time faculty and your staff, and your campus environment is extremely well adapted to do what ATS says that a seminary is supposed to deliver. And to all of you who are students here, I hope you will take 100% advantage of what you have available here. Because once you leave Florence, you're going to miss it. You have the academic. You have Berlin. Does anybody know more about the Restoration Movement in North Alabama than Wayne Kilpatrick? I mean, he knows more little bits and pieces of the Restoration Movement than, I mean, he can ramble on for hours, can't he? You've got textual language scholars. You've got Goldman, Gallagher, and Daly. Jeremy Barrier can teach you more about interpretation and application of the text than anybody, I think. Jamie Cox, she can help you on research. On and on I can go. What about the heart side, the skill side, the practical wisdom side, the devotional understanding side? I've known Dennis Jones a long time. I truly believe that you can learn more about people skills and leadership from him than just about anybody in the world. Just sit and absorb that from him. You can learn how to get in and work with the church and work with people and get along with people and make that a successful work. He's been there, and he knows how to do that. Ted Burleson, Bill Bages, they can teach you about ministry. Dr. Snodgrass, she can teach you about counseling, and she can teach you about people and give you insights there. Evangelism, Jones, Barrier, Gallagher, they've been out there. They're running all over the world all the time. They can help you there. Christian service, that may be the most important thing out of everything that goes on here at Heritage Christian. It's probably the most discounted thing that happens on this campus. The thing that is the most often dismissed thing that is done here on this campus. And so, give Brad your full cooperation. Campaigns. When I was here in the early 90s, teaching here at IBC, students complained about campaigns. I remember one student getting up at campaign reports, and he started off with his campaign report by saying, "I hate campaigns. I love campaigns." Guy Langston. And he had a love-hate relationship with campaigns, but those campaigns were rewarding. I mean, relationships were built on those campaigns, and experiences. Cherish the atmosphere here, the friendships you'll develop, the devotionals here, the fellowship, the fun and the laughter. You've got a student-teacher number relationship here that you ought to cherish. And so the experiences of people of like faith, and that's going to shape you as a person. Let me tell you one story here that was in Alshire's book that maybe will be symbolic of the kind of experiences that you'll have here. Alshire, who was the director of ATS at the time that he wrote this book, tells about of his days in seminary. And he was in seminary back during the days of the Vietnam War, during the days of the Civil Rights Movement. And on May 4th one year, when he was in seminary, there were some anti-war demonstrations at Kent State. And this is back before some of you were born. And 4 students were killed in the anti-war protest. I mean, I remember this because I was in college back then, and I was in school at University of Alabama at that time, and there were anti-war protests going on at Alabama when I was there, and I remember this very well. And a lot of the things that were going on at Alabama at that time, and one of my friends was arrested and thrown in jail in some of those same protests. But anyway, those 4 students were killed, and some of the classes were canceled at the seminary where Alshire was in school at the time. They called for that whole day at the seminary to be declared as a day of prayer. Some of the classes met and they prayed in class. Wayne Oates was well known as a very spiritual man at that seminary, and all the students went to his class wondering what he would do. He walked into class and all the students were sitting there, and he began class in this way. He said, "This has been declared a day of prayer. My son is in the Mekong Delta on a gunboat fighting in this war. My namesake, Wayne Barnett," he was the son of another professor at the seminary, and he had been named Wayne after his name, Wayne Oates. "My namesake, Wayne Barnett, fled the country because he concluded that this is an immoral war. You tell me how to pray." And he stood there, and there was total silence in the room for about 2 minutes, and no one dared to say a word. It's a difficult moral situation. What do you say? How do you pray? People are on both sides. Godly people are on both sides. And after about 2 minutes of silence, he said, "Class dismissed," and he walked out of the room. Slowly over the next 10 minutes, one by one, the students left the room. It made a deep impression on everybody in the room. You have already had, and you will have, experiences like that here at Heritage Christian. That's what a seminary education is all about. It's not just about classes and books and tests and grades. That's what Heritage Christian can do that UNA can't do, and the University of Alabama and Auburn can't do. And so cherish your experiences here and value your time here. I hope you will appreciate your time here, and thank you for listening to me today.